Welcome back, ICM. As you saw in the last video, classes and objects are a great way for us to condense and encapsulate things that have a lot of different properties that could result in many, many different variables into one nice compact place. So we are going to start working with this idea using classes on the canvas. This also means that we're going to build out specific actions, which in classes are called methods, to affect the objects we are making so that they become more interesting than just something that prints in our console or a static thing on our canvas that you guys could have made in like week 1 of your learning. So to do that, we're going to build out this bubble class together. And throughout future code alongs, we're going to be adding on to that bubble class you create. So please make sure that it is somewhere safe. I am going to not really be relying on the slides that exist from here until whatever is marked. I think it's when we get to the extensions. Those are all the things that are generally marked as like FYI when we're in PD. So they're things that are covered in the code along anyway, but if you are someone who would really like to view those to process, please feel free to pause the video at any time and look at slides from 35, I think, on to like 45. Peruse, review, whatever. Just know that it's also things that we are talking about and reviewing and doing it together in this code along. So again, I would have your slides open, your video, your editor. I think that's all that we'll need for today. If you need something else, feel free to pause and open another slide. And also a reminder that I am going to work at a pretty normal pace for me. I know that I type faster than most people and I'm familiar with this content already, so feel free to pause the video whenever you want, even if I have not given you warning to pause. And, you know, catch up at your own pace, review, rewatch as you need to. So just a reminder of what we saw in our last video, class syntax, which I will show you in a second. There's a template available for you as well. When we make our class itself, which is what's happening down here, our class definition is always class, class name. Best programming practice is to capitalize that class name. It will always contain a constructor. It may contain methods, which we will see shortly. And then to make new objects from that class, we create a variable to hold them. Somewhere in our code, usually in setup, but realistically this could be anywhere, we will say variable equals new, whatever the class name is. This should be capitalized if we were sticking with our theme. And then we would call any methods wherever we need to in our code. Today we're going to do a lot of those in Draw, but again, they could be anywhere. We're going to build this together. I do think it's beneficial for you to practice typing this out. But if you ever need to see an example, there is a template available at this link that you can go to on your own. So I'm going to move to our editor, and without too much further ado, I'm going to start building out this bubble class. And it's going to start out kind of boring. So I want my class to be called Bubble, so I'm going to start by writing class Bubble. Again, capital B is how we distinguish classes from objects and functions. My computer needs to know where my bubble class begins and ends, so that is a curly brace to start and a curly brace to end. And then inside of here is all the stuff that makes this class tick. And it always starts with a constructor. The constructor doesn't do anything, it just tells the computer what are the pieces I need to make this bubble class realized. So in my bubble class, I'm envisioning that it's going to display on the screen like a bubble, so it's going to be an ellipse. And the first thing I want to think about are, what are the key parts that I need in an ellipse? So I know that just writing an ellipse function, it needs an x, it needs a y, and then it needs like a width and a height, or just one of those numbers if I don't want it to be an oval. And in this case, I do want it to be a perfect circle, so I'm fine just having like we can call it a diameter. So in my constructor, I'm going to say this dot x equals, well, let's call it x, and we will up here make a variable called x. As a reminder from the last video, parameters that we pass through in our constructor, those are things that we're expecting to change for every bubble. We want those to be different. And we're going to feed it into our constructor function once we decide to make a new object. Now in the last video, you saw me using things like n and e, and it would say this dot name equals n. These two letters do not have to match. I could say that this is x position, and I could say this dot x equals x position. That's totally fine. It works the same way. But for ease of programming and ease of typing, most often you will see people saying things like this.x equals x. I also want there to be a y position, and I want the y position to be able to change, because how I'm imagining this in my mind are bubbles that start everywhere and like bounce around the screen, and it's very beautiful and whimsical. So I also want that to be something that I can feed in. And then I want my bubbles right now to be the same size, and maybe later I might change that. But I'm going to say that they're all 50 units in diameter. That seems right to start a bubble. So if I go up to the top, I can make a variable. I'm going to call it bub1. And I can, inside my setup, say that bub1 equals a new bubble. And I'm going to have this new bubble start in the exact center of my screen. I make my bubble, but I don't see a bubble on my screen. I can console log bub1, and I'm going to get a bunch of information about that bubble. It tells me the x and the y and the diameter all exist. It tells me it's an object, but it's not displaying on my screen because I haven't taught the computer that displaying on my screen is something that bubbles should do. I haven't taught it what a bubble is supposed to look like, even though I have a very clear idea in my head of what a bubble should look like. My computer has no idea. So to fix this situation, I need to make my very first method, which I'm going to call on with this bubble. So a method is just a specific type of function that only works within a class. And because we declare it in a class, we don't need that function word that we're used to writing when we write functions. The class definition is assumed to only be a constructor and methods. There's no space for like outside weird other things, like other variables or other mess that we might include in like our draw or our setup function. It's very concise, it's very to the point. So to build this function that will display my bubble, I'm going to call it display. This is a random word that I'm choosing. You could call it like showbub, you could call it bubbly wobbly, I don't know, I don't care. But I'm going to call it display because I want it to mean what it does. And my display, being a function, has these parentheses after it where it can take in values. I don't think I need to take in any outside values to display my bubble because everything I need to draw a circle already exists in my constructor. So when I draw this ellipse, I'm not going to say my ellipse is 200, 250. That's values that are going to be static all the time. I want this to display and change for every single bubble. So whenever I'm talking about all instances of an object that could be different, I'm going to use the this version of all my variables. So I'm saying this.x, this.y, and this.diameter. Now, this, as we saw in our last code along, that's just a stand-in for whatever object you're using. So my object here is bub1. When I call on bub1, it's going to sub it in for the this on its own. And I know that's confusing because the words I'm using are confusing, but we're going to see this right now. So I've made my variable. I've put a new bubble in that variable. Now if I want that bubble to show up on my screen in draw, because I want this to be happening forever, I could say bub1.display. This is subbing bub1 in for this. It's telling it that the thing I want to do with bub1 is display. I don't just want information. I don't want to like access the x or the y value. I want it to show up. And now when I click play, bub1 shows up on the screen. And I could get crazier with this. I could give it like an interesting fill. Maybe I want to play with the opacity so it's kind of see-through. You know, we have options. I actually want to make the opacity like really light. Yes, okay. Maybe not that light. Maybe I'll keep it at 75. Okay, we're going to play with this. It's going to be fun. So this bubble right now, a little bit boring, just in the sense that I could have done this without any of this class stuff. But here's, coming back to our brain starter, the parts that make this so useful. This display function gets to show up. Maybe I want this bubble to be animated. So I'm going to make it move, and at first, I'm going to make it like a really weird wiggly bubble. I'm going to give it like a speed to move around at, and I'm going to do that the same way we did in our animation unit. So I am going to say that this.x should equal this dot x plus a speed of my choosing. In order to get those speeds, actually, let's do it like this. I'm going to say that when my bubble moves, when I call this function, this dot x is going to be this dot equal to this dot x plus a random value between -2 and 2. And this dot y is equal to this dot y plus a random value between -2 and 2. And if you recall, saying this dot y equals this dot y plus something is the same as saying plus equals. These are both a similar statement. So now it should pick a speed. It should move around. So let's see what happens here. When I go up to the top in order to get it to move, I need to say that bub1 dot move is something that should happen. And now we see my bubble like wiggling all over the place, doing its little wiggle thing. If I wanted speed to be more consistent, instead of picking a new speed every time move is run, which is what it's doing right now, I could set that up here in my constructor. I could say that this dot speed equals, this dot x speed equals something, this dot y speed equals something. I could add more properties to it. I could also add more stuff into move. So maybe I don't want my bubble to be able to reach the edge. I might say this, if this dot x is greater than the width, or this dot x, or is two of those lines. Those lines, by the way, found between your backspace delete and your enter return key. I could also say this dot x needs to be less. If it's less than the width, reverse the speed. My issue here, I don't have a speed variable to reverse, so this is where up top, I'm going to give it a consistent speed. I don't want it to like wiggle that way. I want it to just move all the time. I'm going to say this dot x speed equals random -2 to 2. It's going to pick this once when my bubble is made, and it will not keep changing. If I wanted to randomize the speed, I could write that somewhere else in my code. This dot y speed equals random -2 to 2. Then I'm going to add this dot x speed plus this dot x plus this dot x speed, and this dot y equals this dot y speed. I can set y speed equal times equal to -1 to reverse the direction. That should be x speed. I can do the same thing for y and height. All of this code, which I'm buzzing through really fast, comes from our Unit 4 stuff that we went through in PD. If you are not familiar with it, please come back and talk to me. I'm happy to help you. So now when I hit play, my bubble, oh, it still wiggles. That's cool. My bubble's wiggling around. If it got rid of its wiggle, it would move in one solid direction. So let's give it not a random speed. Let's make the x speed 3. Let's make the y speed -2. Why are you still wiggling? All right, my mistake with my logic. It was still wiggling because I had these zeros as width and height when it should have been 0. This is to keep things from going off the canvas. This is what happens when I rush. But now I have a bubble that bounces around the screen and just keeps bouncing forever. And the nicest thing about this is I could make, and let me go back to making this random, -3 and 3, random -2 and 2, because I want all my bubbles to be different. Okay. The nicest thing about this, if I wanted to make another bubble, up at the top, I could say var bub2. I could say bub2 is a new bubble that starts at 5100. And now when I make this new bubble, I don't even have to worry about animating it, because once I add in bub2.display and bub2.move, my second bubble is moving. I did not need to write other variables for it. I didn't need other conditionals. It just moves and bounces on its own. I would encourage you to think about how you could change and adjust these bubbles. I would encourage you to try and add more bubbles just to see how easy it is. And once you are feeling comfortable, if you slide down to slide 48, try and take on some of these challenges before you move on with our code alongs. Good luck!